Welcome everyone. It's a great privilege for me tonight to have John Spicer here. And John has also been involved recently in updating a book. He's too modest or just forgot. He didn't bring any of these books with him, but he's done a book on biodiversity, Beginner's Guide. And it's a really good readable book. The reason why I mention it though, I've got the first edition. What I really like about this book, because if you read this book, his faith and his science come together. They really do. It isn't in a contrived shoehorning way. It really does come together. You can read it in the way that he writes, but also in what topics that he deals with. I mean, there aren't many books on biodiversity in which you've got full-on philosophers and laid-back religion as a subheading. And it's throughout his book. So he incorporates the values of his faith as well as the disciplines of his science. So that's enough about me. There was something I wanted to note though. I read on the John is a leading member of Mutley Baptist Church, where his wife Fiona is a pastoral lay worker. Is that right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
She runs the place.
She runs the place. Yeah, I can see that. And again on her blog, it says that Fiona says that one of her general things that she does is to stir people up and get them doing things. John has done that in marine biology. He's done that in the people that he's worked with and his great team of research workers. And he'll probably do it with us tonight. So over to you, John. I'll let you stir us all up.
How do you follow that? Right. It's lovely to be here, actually. I'm delighted to be asked. And when friends ask you to do things, it's always good just to say yes, isn't it? Rather than try and think of excuses why not. And so I'm so pleased to be here. So, what did the Romans ever do for us? I would really like to take some time and look at what happened between BC 30 and AD 120 in terms of Roman culture. But I actually know nothing about it at all, so I'm not going to do that. This is my daughter and I walking around Rome and she's saying, "Daddy, what's that?" And I'm saying, "Buy a book." So why bother to put this? What did the Romans ever do for us? I want to change it. Right? I mean, it was a really famous program at the time. What did the Romans do for us? It was great. But I want to do, what did marine biodiversity do for us? It's a great question. And it's just asking that about any subject at all. You know, what did it do for us? Scientists do it all the time. There's a great scientific paper from 1934 which says, what use is ecology? And it's not being cheeky, it's just saying, how does it impact us? And sometimes there's a thought that people who do basic science don't really impact things. You know, you've got to do applied science. But all science has impacts on our lives, whether we know it or not. So I want to know, what did marine biology ever do for us? Now, I come at this from someone who every single day goes swimming. The shorty wetsuit there is gone, and it's now just trunks, even through the winter. So I'm absolutely dedicated to it. I love the ocean. I love the sea. It's great. So that's okay, isn't it? An enthusiast about the sea. But not everyone can be an enthusiast, can they? I mean, it's a particular thing. And I can try and get you enthusiastic about the sea, and I hope I do, and the things that live in it. But even if you really don't care, even if you really don't give a stuff about marine life, it affects your life. It affects the way you live, the way you think, your whole existence. And I want to just give a couple of little insights into that. It's not complete by any stretch of the imagination. It's really just the random thoughts of a Scotsman who's out of his place down in southwest England. Marine biodiversity. I mean, even to start unpacking that, here, these are animals, right? Nothing to do with the bacteria and the tiny little things that you can see, but these are animals. Now, normally when you think of animals, it's lions and tigers and antelope, and we're sort of familiar with those things. Maybe not in the high street, but at least on television. But as you look at these, I'm going to use my magic thing. Watch this. Look. Right, that's good, isn't it? All mod coins. That's a worm. It's got a polychaete worm related to the things that you dig up from the estuary. This thing here, now, marine biologists and zoologists, you keep quiet. Any of you who have trained in marine biology and zoology, I don't want to hear from you just yet. But anyone else, do you know what this is? This strange thing. Sorry? No, it's not. Although you're right, it looks like it, but this thing is about that size. Good try though, because it does look diatomish. Anyone idea? It's a sea gooseberry. Was it? Well done to you. You get a full point for knowing it, half a point for not taking away for not saying it. Yeah, I mean, these are incredible. These are cocoon jellies. We're not quite sure how they fit into the pattern of life, but they're really, really big news in the ocean. Jellied things in the ocean. Jelly makes the ocean work. There's so much jelly in the ocean, but you can't get it because if you put a net through, you just end up with jelly soup. So we're only beginning to know. Right, what about this one? Any ideas? It's a sea urchin. It is a tremendous creature. How would you like to spend your life with your bottom and top of your head, and then when you need the bathroom, you just go and just cover yourself? Or else, even better, you can give a sea urchin a biscuit. There's a YouTube clip on this, and it will be able to eat it. Now, you might not think, of course it can eat it, but how do you move a biscuit from, let's put it on top of your backside to start with. How do you move a biscuit from your backside to your mouth, which is underneath, when you don't have a head or a front, when you don't have a proper nervous system? You've got millions and millions of little tube feet and millions of sharp spines, and yet you can still move a biscuit round to your mouth. Type it into YouTube. Sea urchin eating a biscuit. There's some cool music, Icelandic music alongside it. They're sort of unearthly. You put all this mixed together, and seriously, when you go anywhere in the world, the profusion of marine life is incredible, and different things. I spent quite a few months in Antarctica, and to see the stuff there, it's almost as if someone has got a huge barrel of creatures and just kept on emptying them one after another. And sometimes you don't actually see the seafloor just because of the profusion of creatures that are there. Together, they live sort of together, but we used to call them communities, but that was making too much of the interactions, but they do interact. We call them associations now. But the associations that you see in a coral reef are amazing. But you sort of know that, don't you? You've watched enough David Attenborough to know coral reefs are amazing. Mangroves, which stick to high heaven, they are colossally important in the economy of the sea. Do you know that there are areas of the sea where there's marine life that live in oxygen that would kill just about anything else? There's so little of it. Mile after mile, kilometre after kilometre, showing my age, kilometre after kilometre, for thousands of kilometres, 1.5 kilometres down, an area where there's so little oxygen and it's packed full of animal life adapted to that. Go to the very bottom of the sea, and you've got sea pigs, things that look a little bit like pigs walking around, but they're actually related to the sea urchin, although they look like pigs. And then you come across areas where there's material coming from not quite the centre of the earth, but deep down, and creatures that live there. There is nowhere there isn't marine life. In my lifetime, marine biodiversity, the way it's been put together, our understanding has changed. You think of this as marine biodiversity. At this moment in time, viruses and things that you can't see, we understand are making the sea work. Even the smell of the sea is created by viruses and bacteria. The first time I saw that happen, a very famous virologist called Billy Wilson, who's the head of the Marine Biology Association, he said, "John," he's from Scotland, so the accent's right. He said, "John, smell this." And he put this bottle in front of me. I mean, when a Glasgow person or a Scottish person puts a bottle of liquid in front of you like that, you are a bit careful. And so I went forward. He said, "There's no smell." He said, "Aye, that's right. Wait." And he put some stuff in, some bacteria and some viruses, gave it a shake and said, "Smell it now." I said, "It smells like the sea." He said, "Yeah, I told you the small things were important." Our understanding and how the whole thing works, Marine biodiversity is not just this, it's a whole profusion of stuff which works together and works together to do things. It's not just that it's beautiful, it does things. So, moving along. Now, this isn't a John Spicer original idea. Here's someone who loved marine life, loved this part of the country, lived in the southwest. Charles Kingsley, he wrote The Water Babies, which is a great Christian stroke marine biology book, actually. It's about marine life and it's about life as a Christian, because he didn't seem to think that you needed to separate the two things. The Wonders of the Shore, what a great name for a book. The Wonders of the Shore. And he starts off by saying, you have your holiday and you can take your train down to the seaside. Are you going to waste your time idly, just sitting around? No, discover the wonders of the shore. And then he goes on to talk about how it's an education in itself. And you can educate yourself by going to the shore. And okay, it's a bit funny now, with some of the antiquity of it, where he says the great naturalist. If you want to be a great naturalist, he, notice not she, he must be able to ride a horse at the drop of a hat. He must be able to pull a dredge without being tired. He must be able to fight for his life in a foreign land. That's what makes a good marine naturalist. You think, okay. I mean, sometimes it's hard, but it's pretty tough. But he's gone on and on about the wonders of the ocean, that you can learn things. It's not just that it's there, but you can learn things from it. What does marine biodiversity do for us? One of the sort of key things, and it's quite difficult to get your head around this because it's at a planetary level, is it makes our planet just right for life. Sometimes scientists have called Earth the Goldilocks planet, because it's not too hot and it's not too cold, it's just right. In terms of oxygen, it's just right. And so many things, it's just right. But it's not the planet that's just right. It's the planet and all the things on it. And let's face it, 75% of that planet is seawater, down to 11 kilometres deep. That makes the workings of all the living things there make our planet habitable. Not nice, although it is nice. Not beautiful, although it is beautiful. But make it habitable. So as soon as you start to muck around with that, you start to make our planet uninhabitable. Just a wee quick look. There we go. This is Mars, Earth, Venus. Most of the people in the room belong to the middle planet. If you belong to the other two, it would be really good to talk to you and just find out how things are going there. You look at the atmosphere, Venus. It's pretty wild in Venus. You would really enjoy it there for the first few seconds before you die. Mars, very, very cold. We're beginning to see Mars even more, but look at Earth. Earth has got all this stuff on it that's not just lying around like rocks, it's alive. And even in the oceans, although we can't see it, the oceans are alive. The figure in red there, that is what should be the oxygen on Earth, 0%. Venus, there's a trace amount of oxygen. Mars, 0.13%. Round about us just now, it's 20%. 21. I mean, there's quite a few of us here. But there should be 0. Why is there oxygen on Earth? There's oxygen on Earth because of biodiversity, and in particular, because of marine biodiversity. This little thing, Prochlorococcus. What a great name. It's not the sort of thing you'd want to be introduced to in a pub. You'd never remember that name. Prochlorococcus. It's tiny. It's a tiny little creature. It's not even an animal. It's not sort of a plant, but it's able to make energy from the sunlight. To say that it's abundant in the oceans, just this one thing, 20%, 30% of all of the oxygen on Earth comes just from this. In terms of the things that are green, if you like, in the sea that can make energy from sunlight, 50 to 80% of our oxygen comes from them. Don't get me wrong, rainforests are important. Rainforests produce an awful lot of oxygen, but it's actually outweighed by what happens in the ocean. I'm a bit careful with the figures because I've said 50 to 80%, it depends how you calculate it. But still, even at the lowest level, 50% of the oxygen that keeps us alive comes because the earth is not the earth, it's actually the water and the creatures living in it. If we look at carbon dioxide, Venus is mainly an atmosphere of carbon dioxide. So is Mars. We should have, if Earth was just a dead planet, we should have about 98% carbon dioxide. I've had to change this figure through time because it's going up. When I started giving these lectures, it was 0.03%, it's now 0.04%. It doesn't sound very much, but it changes the way the Earth works. And all the things, not just on land, but in the ocean, can offset that carbon dioxide. One of the reasons that we don't have runaway global warming right now is because of our ocean, which is acted as a huge sponge. One of the reasons we don't have as big a carbon problem as we've got, and it's bad, I assure you it's bad, but marine life is really good at soaking up carbon. And so as a result of life on Earth, we have relatively little carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And that reflects in the surface temperature. Just plain physics, you can actually work out the average temperature of a planet just by how far it is away from the sun. You sit by a fire, someone sits 1 metre away, someone sits 2 metres away, someone sits 4 metres away. You can work out roughly who's going to be cold and who's going to be hot. So Venus, the surface temperature of Venus is a nice 459 degrees, which for those of you who have never put your head in an oven which is fully going, it's probably quite hot. Mars, average -53. I've done that with a Canadian who actually probably lives through that sort of nonsense and actually goes out and says, this is real life. -53 is really bad for you. The idea that the Earth must be between those two figures, 458, -53, and we can work it out. We should be at 280 degrees centigrade. That should be the average temperature on Earth if you just do it by distance. But it's not, it's 13 unless you live in the southwest and it's 10 or something. It's quite small. That's because of life. Life makes Earth good for life. It's not just a case of a planet that we have to look after. It's a planet which has life, and much of that life is in our ocean. What has marine biodiversity ever done for us? It keeps you and I, your children, the people you're related to, the people you meet in the street. It keeps us alive. It keeps our society going, because if that's damaged, societies tend to break down under such massive, catastrophic environmental things. What does marine biodiversity do for us? It inspires innovation. Now, anyone know what this is? It's the gherkin. Now, it's not a gherkin. It's just so ironic. It's not a gherkin. This is a sponge. This is a sponge. It's based on a marine animal. Sponges are incredible. The first person ever looked at one, for some reason, he wanted to see if it could, because it didn't look like a proper animal, he wasn't sure if it was alive. So he got a lady's stocking, presumably taking the lady out of it first, and forced this sponge through a lady's stocking so you had individual cells, as one does. And then he mixed it up in a little container and left it. And after 2 days, it had rebuilt itself. They're incredible. We don't even know where they fit in the scheme of life. Sponges are really big news, particularly in the deep sea, particularly in the Antarctic. And we're only beginning to understand them. But the person that built the gherkin, the sponge, knows that sponges have lots of holes on them, which are called ostia, just posh name for holes. And they draw water through those holes, and the water goes up the whole body. It's a way of taking food, it's a way of getting rid of waste. And so the person that built this thought, I wonder if what works for the sponge could work for human beings working there. So the design for, not the gherkin, the sponge, was based on a sponge. Now think about it. If there's no marine biodiversity, if there's no weird and wonderful creatures like this, where does that idea come from? Moving along quickly, what does marine biodiversity do for us? It inspires creativity. Now here's something that's difficult to put a price on, isn't it? Very difficult to put a price on. This is the Green Space. It's a shop that my wife Fiona runs. It's associated with the church, Mutley Baptist Church. It keeps a community going for recovering addicts and people who are homeless but want to be part of a community. The Green Space trains them in how to do retail, but it also sells the work of local artists at reasonable prices. The artists benefit and the community benefit as well. It just so happens it's packed full of marine stuff. Absolutely packed because it sells. Lots of people are just taken with this. Is work by Debbie Mason, who's a great marine artist, but it really sells. It's not just that people think it's pretty, but they're willing to put their hand in their pocket and buy these things and put them on their walls because they're beautiful. Now, this is a crab, for goodness sake. Okay, whales you can sort of almost believe. Everyone loves a whale. But there's a crab. She's done plankton. They all sell. And think about it. If you didn't have marine biodiversity, where's that stuff going to be? And this is just local artists. We could actually go and consider the more famous artists who've done work which involves marine life. And there's lots of them. Some key pieces of work in the art world, but it wouldn't exist without marine biodiversity. So it's a bit more difficult to get your head round. The oxygen's okay, isn't it? If you want to feel what it's like without oxygen, just imitate me, right? Okay, you're going to feel that immediately. But do away with that. I mean, it doesn't do anything. But can you imagine a life without art, without music? Can you imagine what life would be like without marine biodiversity in terms of art? And all of a sudden, it starts to be really quite big and important. Even if you've never seen the ocean, people buy these things because they're beautiful. I just went to my bookshelf and just pulled down some of my, I was going to say more popular books. I suppose they're more popular if you're my age. Moby Dick, tremendous human story. But at the centre of it is a whale. And a whale which is portrayed as quite malevolent. Amazing story. But if you've ever read Moby Dick, it's a biology book. It's really bizarre. You're expecting to read it as a novel, and he starts to talk about the classification of whales and the behaviour of whales, and you're thinking, this was a novel. I'm now doing zoology at university. And yet it's captivating. A couple of years ago, Plymouth University did a great reading from the Moby Dick, and millions of people joined in listening to Moby Dick being read, and this whale and the capture of this whale. It's affected people's ideas of the ocean. It's affected their ideas of what people are like and how people interact with nature. If you didn't have the whales, where would that be? It just disappears from the bookshelf. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne, who absolutely loves all things science, but he gives pictures of the ocean that even in the 1860s when he was writing was way ahead of its time. And the folk then must have been reading thinking, wow, this is amazing. This deep sea world he introduces, which is actually pretty realistic. And of course, you've got a man, Captain Nemo, who loves it, but at the same time doesn't love human beings because of what's happened to him. And the interaction of exploring that and the people that he's captured reacting to that. It's a very human story. It's captured people's imagination. But you couldn't tell it anywhere else. You know, you can't really tell it as a story in a chip shop or down the Albert pub in EastEnders. It doesn't quite work in the same way. You really need the ocean and ocean life. John Steinbeck's books, I don't know if you've ever read them, but the students here, you need to read these. These are fantastic. The Log in the Sea of Cortez. A bunch of people go for a little trip to collect marine animals. That's what he portrays it as. But it's much, much more than that. Not only is it beautiful biology, but it's actually beautiful philosophy, art. The way it's written is absolutely amazing, but you couldn't do it without the words to describe the ocean and its inhabitants. It's stunning. The same with Cannery Row. One of the few books that I've given to students and then just watched them cry because the stories in them are just so real. and it's based around a marine biologist who works out of the west coast of the States. And it's just lots of little short stories, but there's one in particular where he's talking about going to this tide pool and he finds a young girl's body. And it's one of the most moving, heart-touching things. But because he knows the ocean well, I'll just swallow it. Just go and buy it. Canary Road. I get no money from you buying it, so it's not as if I'm advertising. But those stories can't exist without marine biodiversity. If you somehow could remove marine biodiversity from the world, all of this disappears. And think of the amount of literature. This is me just going to my shelf and taking 4 books off. Also, it inspires creativity in ways that sometimes are shocking, and sometimes you almost want to laugh, and other ways that are really profound. The Babylonians and the Assyrians looked up into the sky. And they looked at the stars, which are awesome enough, and they drew pictures in the sky. And a number of the pictures were of marine biodiversity. What inspired human beings to look at those stars and put marine biodiversity into the stars? What was in their minds? How did that happen? What's really going on there? We'll never know, but if you just even listen to me a little bit, you'll be thinking, my goodness, that's incredible. Human beings who knew no science, one sense, but they still know enough to look up into the heavens and they see images where they interpret them in terms of marine biodiversity and other biodiversity as well. I find that really humbling. Ted Hughes, now I usually say, has anyone here read Ted Hughes? I'll do it the other way around. Has anyone here not read Ted Hughes? Right, you go home now and you buy just one Ted Hughes book and you read them. He writes about animals. Well, he doesn't. He uses animals to tell stories. Well, no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. He uses animals to tell stories about human beings. No, he doesn't. What does he do? You read his poems, and he's very good at it, talking about wildlife, including how the whale became. They are stories, they are fictional, but you read them and you know that this guy understands marine biodiversity, its players and its interactions. Now, he's a poet, it's not science, but you read it and it tugs at your heart and your mind, and you come away thinking, that's amazing. Particularly when you hear him read the poems himself, there's a lot of him doing, he was the poet laureate. Ted Hughes was our poet laureate, and he made famous this idea of biodiversity talking to us. Not just in an anthropomorphic way, but something about biodiversity that spoke to us. And he put it into his poems. A world without art and marine biodiversity. A world without books that incorporate marine biodiversity. Poems that do away with the sea. It's quite a poor world. Maybe not poor in money terms, but in terms of the things that we live for, it's quite poor. Oh yeah, no, I can't. I mean, I've got to talk about Nemo and Jaws. 2 films that you might have just looked at them thinking, that's a big, big rubber shark. That's not going to scare anyone. But I tell you, more people signed up to do marine biology after Jaws than anything else. It affected the way that people were wild swimming. It ceased. And lots of people did marine biology because of a silly film. Except it wasn't a film that must have captured something. People are fascinated by sharks. Now, I mean, if you're going to be fascinated by something that's a bit safe, at least, rather than something will eat you. But it captivates people. And it wasn't just the sharks. Finding Nemo, yeah, there was a shark in it. But it's a clownfish. It's an ornamental fish. And yet the story captured people's hearts, imaginations and minds, all those things. It's changed the way a generation thinks. It's just a cartoon. But it's not though, is it? It's not just a cartoon because it has actually influenced the way we even think as a society about the marine world. Marine biodiversity, it inspires creativity. Without it, this goes much more limited. What does marine biodiversity do for us? It inspires us to Here I couldn't think of the proper word. I've used the word connect. I've also got the word worship here. And by worship, what I mean is something that's very, very deep within our psyche, where these people here, this is La Jolla in the States, and all the seals and sea lions gather, and people, even although you're not allowed to go near them, they just go down and they stand with them, and you see them saying to one another, families and people that don't know one another, look at that, that's amazing. This little boy saying to his dad, Dad, look what they're doing, that's incredible. This stranger standing next to another stranger saying, I've never seen anything like this, this is amazing. Now, that's worship, when you're seeing something that is amazing and has bowled you over, and you have to say to someone else, that's amazing, that's wonderful. And it's the same thing that you get within religious worship, but it's wider than that. It's something that's really common to everyone, irrespective of your philosophy, your beliefs. That feeling of the need to worship. I remember as a kid, we were walking home late at night, and it was cold and frosty, and all the stars came out. And I remember Mum said to his mum, Mum, you have to look at this. And she said, I'm cold, let's go. Mum, you have to look at this. And I thought afterwards, why were you just so insistent? You know, it's just stars. I needed to show Mum it and say, look, this is amazing, this is affecting me. I don't know how, I can't put it into words. That's what I mean by connecting and worshipping this way. It's something that it's difficult to put your finger on, because sometimes the object of worship is something that you choose, like a deity, but other times it's stuff that you don't choose. It just happens to you. It creeps up in you and grabs you and you think, flipping it, what was that? This picture here, this is the picture which Kevin Gaston and I used for our second edition of our biodiversity textbook. Look at it a bit closer. There's over 130 different forms of life in this picture, this small picture taken of South Africa. There are things which are sponges, that we talked about, urchins, there's all sorts. Most of the types of creature that live on Earth, basic types, are in this picture. A small picture of one little bit of shore of South Africa. Now that's astounding. And I can assure you, if you were in your living room just now, sitting with friends or family, or even people you didn't know, although that would be a bit strange, wouldn't it? I can imagine you saying, look at that, what's going on there? Are they really all packed like that? I could show you pictures from the Antarctic where you would hardly believe it, and you'd be saying to one another, what is that? That's incredible. What are all those strange things there? Why can't you see the sea bottom? It's a form of connectedness, of worship. You can't put your finger on it, but you know that it's happening to you when it happens. Ed Wilson, who's the person that came up with the term biodiversity, he was fascinated by this connection that they have. And it's really interesting because he's one of the main atheists within the biological community. Not a militant atheist as attacking faith, but someone who just doesn't think we need it. And two things to say about Wilson. One, he was trying to account for this relationship that we seem to have with nature generally. Why is it we seem to have some sort of empathy with nature? And he came up with this, what he called the biophilia hypothesis. And he said, because we are bearers of life, we have compassion and some sort of link with other things that bear life. And he's trying to find a philosophy that links people together with biodiversity, all biodiversity. What's really interesting is that a few years ago, Wilson wrote a letter, he wrote a book, and in the first chapter of the book, it was an open letter to his Southern Baptist pastor. Now, it was a sort of an imaginary thing. He did go to a Southern Baptist church when he was very young, rejected it. But here he was writing this letter and letting everyone else see it. And in the letter, he's saying, the view that I have doesn't seem to work. We don't seem to be able to make the connection that's going to save biodiversity. But you've got it. In your faith, you have a connection because of what you believe. Now, such a prominent atheist to write that in a public sphere. And his thing was, I want to save biodiversity. I love biodiversity. It keeps us alive. You within your faith have something that I don't think I can bring to this. That's stunning. And very humbling, actually. What does marine biodiversity do for us? This is the Isle of Iona. Celtic Christianity. When you read the stuff that these people wrote, it's amazing how they don't seem to have a lot of the sort of boundaries that we do. Because many of the Celtic saints lived quite close to the sea played a big part of their lives. But lots of things did. Listen to this. This is 11th century, right, which is a little bit before I was born. Listen to this. This is St. Columba's Island heritage. Listen really carefully and see this person's view of life, this person's view of marine biodiversity. Delightful I think it to be in the bosom of an isle, on the peak of a rock, that I might see the calm of the sea, that I might see its heavy waves over the glittering ocean as they chant a melody to their Father on their eternal course, that I might see its smooth strand of clear headlands, no gloomy thing, that I might hear the voice of the wondrous birds, a joyful tune, that I might hear the sound of the shallow waves against the rocks, that I might hear the noise of the sea, that I might see its splendid flock of birds over the full watered ocean, that I might see its mighty whales, the greatest of all wonders, that I might see its ebb and its flood tide in their flow, that I might bless the Lord, who has power over all, heaven with its pure host of angels, earth, ebb, flood tide, that I might pore over one of my books, good for my soul, a while kneeling for beloved heaven, a while at the sands, a while gathering dulce from the rock, a while fishing, a while giving food to the poor, a while sitting alone in my cell, a while thinking about the kingdom of heaven, holy, a while doing things that's not too heavy. That would be delightful. And that's someone who has marine biodiversity at the heart of their life, but so many other things at the heart of their life in a way that we don't really see much of, certainly in Western life, I suppose. Marine biodiversity, you couldn't take it away and leave any of those other things. For him, his life, the sea, his faith, helping the poor, that's all part of one thing. What does marine biodiversity do for us? It feeds and it heals us. And it can do so sustainably. There's been a big sort of kick-up about overfishing, and it's right, overfishing is extremely destructive. But it doesn't have to be that way. What's driving the problem with fisheries is not biology, it's greed. It's just pure greed. And also, we're now at a stage where actually most of the stuff that's we would regard as fisheries is actually coming from aquaculture. And that again has its own problems and own issues. But there's no reason why it can't be done sustainably. And the idea that you can do away with taking food from the ocean might be fine for some of us who are fairly rich, but you are condemning the poorest people on earth to, at best, a dreadful life, at worst, extinction. Feeds and heals. Now, here's a great story. Someone who couldn't give a stuff about the applied interest of their work. It's a person who was working on these cone shells, and all he cared about was their evolution. They have toxins in them. They're amazing things. They make little arrows which they shoot at each other or their enemies, and they tip them with poison, as one does. And so he was fascinated by the fact he had so many different cone shells, and he said, I wonder if the chemical they use to poison, is it the same thing? You know, can you actually look, is the same thing evolved more than once or twice? And so he is focused totally on the evolution of dangerous substances that you put on arrows that you throw at other snails. Right, put like that. But of course, once he started looking at the toxins, he realised that they were pretty powerful. And he did some basic pharmacological things, the sort of thing you would do tests on animal material to see what effect it had. And he tested the substance on the hearts of animals, mice and such like, to see what sort of effect it had. The drug that he discovered in this basic science is a thing called tetrodotoxin. It's one of the main ways now of treating ischemic heart disease. It's really good calcium channel blocker. It sells for billions of dollars a year. People like myself who've had heart problems are really thankful that this fella spent a bit of his time looking at the evolution of toxins in little snails, because it's changed my life and changed lots of other people's lives as well. Incredible discovery that it wasn't being looked for. Finally, what does marine biodiversity do for us? I love this painting. This by a friend of Fiona and I's, Diane Rowe Kendall. She lives in Sheffield, and she does pictures from the Gospels, in the Christian New Testament. And this is the finding of a pearl of great price. It's a story, a parable that was told by Jesus about there was once a merchant who found a pearl of great price and then went and sold everything he had to buy it. It's an amazing parable, actually. And it's funny because that pearl, Jesus as a teacher was incredible. He never really pinned things down. He left people to work things out for themselves a lot of the time. That pearl of great price, all sorts of people probably were thinking lots of things. They weren't sitting in a philosopher's hall thinking, that's very interesting. There's tons of dirty people all round about you, all shopping and everything else, and this guy's talking, and you just hear it once. And to me, marine biodiversity is that pearl. It's not the only interpretation of those words, but that pearl of great price. See the way they are looking at that pearl, knowing fine well that what they've got is the finest. And this person here has sold everything, given everything to get that pearl. Marine biodiversity, it inspires us, it keeps us alive, it gives us creativity. Is that not something of great worth? Whether you go to the ocean or not, whether you love the ocean, whether you're stupid like me and go swimming every day, the thing that keeps you alive, what separates you from lentils in your mind, culture, and what inspires worship, and worship in its widest sense, not just a worship of nature, but all sorts of things, is that not something that's worth giving everything for? If that's the case, what's going to happen at COP in Glasgow in the next couple of weeks? What decision are we going to make about the pearl of great price? Because a lot of what we're talking about, not directly, but is our ocean. The stuff that we don't see, we find it hard to value, but I think what I'm trying to say to you is it is totally invaluable, no matter who you are. Thanks so much.
Well, that was wonderful, John, and in some ways quite unexpected, because I'm familiar with some of John's more scientific, more materialistic, if you like, more secular work. And I mean, it's just amazing what John has been involved in. For instance, one of his most recent papers, I think, with Ollie and Simon, was on something called energy proxy traits. I don't understand what it means either, but it's absolutely brilliant mathematical stuff. But what comes across this evening is that although John gets involved in that and can deal with the deep-seated mathematics, what motivates and drives him is some of the things he's been talking about today. The aesthetic values, the creative aspects, which comes through his immersion, his connection with nature, in his case and my case, the ocean aspects of it. And I think it's this immersion in God's creation which gives us joy, and I think it's that immersion, that connection which you say, which is when we are doing it and sharing it, is an act of worship and an act of praise, which really is worthy of our activity. And sometimes we neglect that, and thankfully John doesn't. He doesn't just peer down a microscope or use one of these fantastic high-density systems. He's actually getting his sense of joy, which drives him as well. Thanks very much, and that's absolutely brilliant. Are there any questions, please?
Could you talk about the... Oh, all right. Sure, thank you. Would you mind talking about these snails again? Did you say that they shoot arrows at each other?
Yeah, they shoot little arrows at one another with toxins on them.
That's amazing, thank you. I was just curious about that.
It's not that amazing if you're the other snail that's coming your way.
John, thank you very much for tonight. What would you say is the most amazing discovery in marine biodiversity of the last, 3 or 4 years perhaps?
I mean, do you know, it's really difficult. What I told you about the discovery of viruses making the ocean work, I mean, that was one of the biggest shocks to me. At the moment, because things are changing so quickly, the sorts of discoveries that you're talking about are happening very regularly. Most of them are actually not that good. The one that's taken a good bit of my time. And before I say this, I have hope. I have a hope within biodiversity. I have a hope within my faith. It's all linked together, and I do think there is hope. But you have to set against that the things that you see with your eyes as well. When I did marine biology at Glasgow, final year of the zoology degree, we were taught about seasons in the sea, and April and September are the 2 main seasons for growth in the sea. In my lifetime to the present day, that season has those 2 seasons have grown into 1 season in a lot of places. That is just incredible, that the seasons in the sea have changed, the whole way the sea works has changed. Paper published by some colleagues of mine just last year, showing that the Earth's ocean has lost 5% of its oxygen over my lifetime, the 60 years that I've been alive. 5% of the oxygen gone, not just in little areas, but globally. And those are amazing discoveries. But each of them, if you're not careful, can fill you with a real dread. And they do with our young people. Because they have to live with the consequences of it. So a lot of the discoveries that are made they don't feel good, if you put it that way. In terms of stuff that's genuine fun, I mean, you might laugh at this, the thing that really tickled me and just made me laugh and I thought was amazing is a physicist in the States who managed to turn water into a metal. And he was interviewed about it. That's amazing. What's the application of that? He said, don't know. Don't think there is one. I had to do it on a Sunday because no one would allow me to do it during the week. I just think that's very nice. So that's the way my weird mind works. I thought that was amazing. Our own stuff, I was saying to some folk over dinner, there's a notion called evolutionary rescue, which is that is it possible for any animal, not just marine animals, to evolve their way out of the changes that are going on just now? And there's a feeling that evolution doesn't work that fast. And I've had some students who've been following that up with a tiny little flatworm. I mean, if you guys saw it, you would laugh. But you wouldn't laugh when you cut its head into 5 bits, and then a couple of days later it's got 5 heads and they're all staring at you. It's got incredible regenerative capacity. A lady at the turn of the 20th century did an experiment looking at the animal regenerating and looked at it under different amounts of salt in the water because it lives in a freshwater stream. So far, quite esoteric. The stream that it lives in is in Wembury, and my student went back to that stream in Wembury, collected the animals and did the same experiment as was done in 1914. She also looked at the change in rainfall in Wembury from 1923 to the present day, and rainfall has increased steadily since 1923 to the present day. So she said, if these animals can evolve, they will begin to work better at lower salinities because that's what they're seeing. She did the exact same experiment and that's what she saw. that instead of being very good at just regenerating it to third-strength seawater, they could now regenerate a much wider range of salinities. These animals have evolved out of the problem of fresh water. Now, I wouldn't put hope on that for everything, but that's astounding. And that's probably one of the things that I've been involved in, which has given me most joy. One, to see such a really good student run with that. She published it as an honours project. It's the first example of evolutionary rescue in a marine animal. One of the first examples of evolutionary rescue in any animal in the wild. That's a major accomplishment. And it was done by a girl who is just captivated by this brilliant scientist, redoing the work of another girl scientist in 1914 and pushing forward our understanding. I think that's pretty cool. I really do. I love that. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I live by the river here, and we have wonderful waders. We've got trout. I think there used to be salmon, but I don't think we have many now. Today, the river is a raging torrent as the tide goes out, and it's dark brown. In other words, half Bodmin Moor is being washed down into the sea. What effect does this have if all the rivers around, they're caught as though there were a rushing earth into the sea? If you go swimming, you don't notice that the earth, I don't think. Where's all this earth going to?
I mean, in one way, I don't know where to start, because that's literally, excuse the mixing of metaphors, the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the idea of losing watersheds, of losing soil. I mean, it certainly goes into the ocean, it's deposited in the ocean. That's always happened, but not in the scale that's happening just now. It's not so bad for us. I mean, we can see it and notice it, and we can take action against it. But there's a lot of the places in the world where that's happening, and people are losing not just the habitat that's around about them, but they're losing their lives because the watershed goes. There's no clean water, there's no forests anymore because they're taking
50 years ago I worked in Africa. They reckoned that the equivalent of Table Mountain was washed into the sea from Lesotho.
Yeah.
An appalling figure.
Yeah.
All that earth going out down to the sea.
It's the implications of it for that biodiversity, for that web of life, is it tears it apart and it destabilises human life. So that's the answer to your question. We don't feel it quite so much because we're quite rich and can do things against it. But for the people who have no decent money, it's the end, at best, of a way of life, at worst, of their own life. I mean, to go to a place which has been denuded. I saw this in Mozambique, you know, where people were burning wood, because it's the only way to cook, it's the only way to keep warm. And the people that I was seeing were mainly young people who'd lost their parents to AIDS. So, you know, girls of 15 and 16 bringing a family up. And they're living off the forest, and the more they take stuff out of the forest, the more the forest decomposes. And so they're killing themselves to live, you know, and yeah, it's bad for us. And it doesn't do a lot for the ocean as well. That sediment smothers things, and it silts up rivers, and it changes. There's so many things, it's actually difficult to put it into a succinct answer. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Any other questions?
In one of the earlier slides, you showed a picture of the Prochlorococcus,
Yeah.
and you said it affects the whole world. By what mechanism does it?
Produces oxygen.
But it's at the bottom of the sea.
It's small enough that it floats around. It's part of the. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I could have told you hours about it, but I didn't think anybody wanted to hear. Prochlorococcus, it's a very, very small, it's neither animal nor plant, it's far too small for that. It's one of the smallest things that's alive in the sea, but it's so abundant that it produces 20% of all the oxygen on Earth. It's that one thing.
John, I've got one observation and one question really, and one of the observations is we've both been involved in writing about been an education for me. It's an education for me listening to you tonight. But I think the thing that's hit me the most are the new things that are coming out, like the algae producing so much oxygen. Just one species, but one operational taxonomic unit, whatever you want to call it, and the role of viruses. And I think even more so than that, the interconnectivity of everything. I mean, everything is interconnected in the ocean. It is this one world ocean. What we do in one part, what animals do in one part, has an impact on us. So I think that's one of the most worrying things, and you've reiterated that really. My question though is going back to Wilson's comment. Okay, he's made this comment, and I've read it, and I'm aware of Wilson's work. Absolutely amazing biologist, inspiring to read, especially some of his Antwerp and stuff. But you've left it in a way. He's written this letter to the St. Baptist Church and saying we've got something which we can contribute to the conservation of the planet. He's touched on this awe and wonder. Could you elaborate on that a little bit and explain? I mean, most of us here are connected with the church. How do we use that connection? How do we use it to actually help in stewarding our planet, which is something we're asked to do?
Right. So when I gave you that account of Wilson's letter, and it's done in a book that he wrote called The Creation. And when you read it, it's a very clever letter, because part of it, he knows the church's teaching, and he's using that. You feel a little bit, and I could be wrong, but his tongue is a little bit in his cheek, and he's actually saying, "You believe this, do you?" And I think there's a certain amount of cynicism in there, but there's also enough of, I mean, because of the nature of the man, I really do think there's a bit that he hopes it's true, but he's not holding his breath, because Christian theology, particularly from Thomas Aquinas, at the beginning of the first decent millennium after Christ, I mean, his picture of biodiversity was, it's for us to use, and the whole way that the Judeo-Christian scriptures were interpreted was, this is for us to do what we want with. And so he said it doesn't matter how you treat an animal. It might matter for your own sort of humanity, but it doesn't matter to the animal But then there were so few people on Earth then. I mean, we have 7.7 billion people, and you can't have 7.7 billion people all doing what they want to do, not impact on things. So the idea of the theology of Aquinas, which is we can't really damage biodiversity, I think is wrong. Funnily enough, it's another woman who was ignored until fairly recently, Hildegard von Bingen, from 13th century, I think, I can't remember, but she wrote ecological texts. You know, I mean, she's an amazing mystic that the Pope would come to talk to her, ordinary people would come to talk to her, but she wrote about, you can't have all this black smoke, it will destroy our wildlife. You know, 13th century or something, way ahead of her time, but really not part of the culture until fairly recently. Francis of Assisi is now officially the patron saint of ecologists, you know, because of the way that he integrated things. The Celtic Church, I'm going to let you hear there, they saw the whole thing as being interconnected. So it's not even that we have to give up our traditional views of our relationship to the earth. It's I think we have to return to what's actually there. The word is steward. It's really clear that the earth is not ours. I mean, a psalm which I absolutely love is, the earth is the Lord and everything on it. You don't get clearer than that. And I don't know, have you ever gone into someone's garden and just trashed it for the sake of it? Never mind someone, you know, who is God. You know, I mean, you just don't do that. When was it ever a good idea to misuse things? You know, whether we're in a crisis or not, when was it a good idea just to trash something and leave it? Do you know what I mean? When did anyone, when particularly do Christians think it's all right just to use stuff and just not care about the stuff or people? I mean, that to me is mental. So it's not a case of being environmentally aware. It's a case of, do you actually care about anyone apart from yourself? And I think that's a real challenge to the church today, because there are many elements of the church which are seeing this as some atheist plot, and climate change is wrong and fighting against it. What are we doing? And just look at ourselves. It's all right pointing at other people, but just to look at yourself. Do you really think this is God's earth? I forget it. I don't always act as if it is. And I'm supposed to know about this stuff. Is that?
That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Are there any more questions? Yes.
I guess as Christians, we're always trying to connect our faith with our vocation or our jobs, and trying to figure out how we connect with God through our work. And for you, with marine biology, marine biodiversity, when did it click for you that your work in marine biodiversity links in completely with your faith? How did that clicking moment come about?
Do you know, it's funny because there's two things, and there's the idea of vocation, and then there's also this idea that when it dawns on you that the two things are related. I became a Christian when I was 17, and I read this thing that said, whatever you do to the glory of God. Whatever you do well. And I thought, okay, that's what God wants, that's what I'll do. So whatever I've been given to do, I've just tried to do well. So there was never any conscious link in it. It's just that if I'm going to be a marine biologist, I need to try and do this the best I can do it. If I'm going to, I worked as a manager in the shop for a while, and I tried to do that the very best I could. I used to crush boxes and put them into big lumps to put in a truck, and I used to try and do that, try and get better shaped boxes and more put out. Just whatever you did, you did really well because God thought that was good for everyone and you. In terms of the vocation, I really did think that marine biology and science was too selfish. And when I became a Christian, being quite a self-centered person, I was really scared that I would lose the faith that had crept into my life. I mean, I wasn't terribly happy that it crept into my life, really. I made a mistake. I just looked at people who love one another and I thought, I need to be part of that. And I invited this God to come and live with me. Goodness sake, he did. And it scared the living daylights out of me. And I thought, right, I need to get rid of this psychological thing that's happened to me, but he never went away. And so once he was there, I realised that he wanted better for me than I wanted for myself. And so I thought, my wife Fiona, she naturally just loves people, and I thought, man, I need to be involved in that vocationally, So I trained, long story, but I trained as a teacher and a sort of, what's called a guidance teacher, so sort of half social worker, half teaching. I thought, that's a good, valuable thing to do. But I never got a chance to do it because some of my non-Christian colleagues thought that God wanted different for me and applied for a job for me. And told me that you said God would stop things happening that were wrong. We've applied for this job, we think you should be an academic. And when I got the job, I thought, I need to think about this. Maybe God just wants me to be good at whatever I'm doing, and this is what he's given me to do. So yeah, it sounds a bit plain when I put it like that, but that was when I realised I was in the right place. Not that I made a link between my faith and the science, just I was in the right place, so just do it well.
Are there any other questions, Dave?
Yeah, I wonder, Don, whether that there are times when you look at something, I have in mind that photograph you put up of the seabed with 150 creatures on it. Did you ever look at something like that and find yourself drifting off into worship of God?
Yeah, although I'll tell you a real story which taught me so much. One of my best friends at university, I mean, he's a colleague, but I mean, we're very close friends. And we were looking down microscope at this little snail in an egg. And I said, it's got 2 hearts. And you could see one beating, and I knew that was okay. But there's another one beating. It's got 2 hearts. I thought, well, that's just amazing, you know. And I found myself, that's what you said, just worshipping. Oh, that's amazing. So I said to my friend who was next to me, just look at that, that's amazing, isn't it? And he turned to me and with a smile says, just biology. And I realised then that faith is something you bring to nature. It's not something you actually get from nature. Because I really trust my friend a lot, and he wasn't being disingenuous, and he's a lovely person. But that was all that he could see. And it dawned on me that I wasn't getting that from the snail. I was getting that from within me. There's something that stirred me, and that was. Yeah, and that was a lovely but a really educational thing, because I just assumed that everyone would have that feeling, and he clearly didn't. Just got extra heart, and he's being honest. He's not being horrible or anything.
That's good to hear. What does it convey? Pictures from the whole telescope.
Yeah.
And just I'm off worship.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder in church whether we should have pictures from the whole telescope. Don't bother him for anything.
You see, I think some people are worried that what you're doing is you're worshipping nature.
Yeah.
You know, and I get that, but for someone who has faith, you can't help but think of the person who's the object of your faith when you look at that thing. It's just, but it's something that's in you. It's not actually in the picture. It's you. So I agree with you. I don't think we need to worry too much about pantheism, or if we do, we really are screwed up.
Well, I could certainly go on discussing things with John all night, and perhaps some other occasion we might do that. But he has to get home to Fiona at some time. But before we wrap
She's
up,
probably not it. She told me not to hurry back. So oh goodness, is this live?
it is.
Dead man walking.
But to wrap it up, I'd like to bring us back to John. You've met John, I've known John, you've heard him tonight, and he'll come across to you, I hope. Well, he does. He comes across to you as a very open and honest person, very accessible. And I think what John forgets about, one of the things he brings through his work is his effect on other people. Now, I noticed that one of the slides up there was the one of you in the water in Plymouth Sound, was taken by Katie Van Santen. And Katie was part of our Christians in Science group. She is an MRes Master Research student, I believe, with you.
Well, no.
With the group,
Yeah,
with the group,
yeah.
with the university. And certainly she was involved with you at Plymouth with the Christians in Science. And it's John's integrity with his work, his honesty with his work, his pursuit for truth in his work and everything that he does, which is contagious. And that affects us. So when we get to know God, we don't only get to know God through the scripture, through nature, we get to know God through the people we meet, the people that love us in the Christian sense. John has come tonight here on a very busy schedule because he's a friend. He's mentioned that to Claire. And that's a reflection of him living out his Christianity. And that's something that certainly informs me. And I hope you share that as well. So John, thank you very much. And thank you very much for this evening.